Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Are you surprised by these farmer protests or are you not? And
Yes.
how do you explain these protests? Are the farmers not understanding what's happened, or the government and supporters of reform like you and me missed out on something?
Yes, what is happening right now in the outskirts of Delhi and between the government and the farmers, I feel it's very unfortunate. Number one, why it is happening? I've said there is a communication failure, but also it's not pure economics. There is a lot behind this, which you and me perhaps cannot easily see. That's not observed. So I feel personally very clearly that the reforms that were put on the table and passed through the parliament, whatever the method in terms of whether it was discussed fully or not and this and that, the actual content of the reforms is for the good of the farmers. And that is because farmer has 100 problems. In the production side, there are problems, and in the marketing, he used to lose most, except perhaps in a state like Punjab or Haryana, where everything that he brought in the mandi would be bought by the government. But that's not the all India picture. So the all India picture, when you consider, I think farmers were being squeezed more in the marketing side. You think about a 2-minute auction and even Azadpur Mandi, and 6% is the official commission he will take. And, sometimes it charges from both sides. Same thing was in Washi. So you have an intermediation cost which was very high without giving commensurate services to the farmer. So this reform bill actually opens up the choices to the farmer. I think these laws were trying to create a formalized system from a very informal way of doing things. And the reason for that was because somebody has to build proper supply lines, particularly for perishables. And that requires massive investments and long-term relationships with the farmers. And I think it is that particular aspect, because government doesn't have the wherewithal, and government shouldn't be entering into every commodity, tomato and potatoes and onions, to build those supply lines. It is the job of the private sector. But the private sector earlier was prohibited, or certain states allowed on case-by-case basis and so on and so forth. It was not a pan-India strategy. So these laws, particularly, farmer produce trade act, that says that you keep on doing the business in your mandi, but if you want to sell it outside the mandi, you're welcome to do that. Now the tussle comes if somebody is buying outside the mandi and not paying the commission or the mandi fee or the cess that some states have been charging. It could have been handled better. Yes, everything can be done better than what we are doing in any field. But that gave an option to make the whole supply line much more efficient, which would make even more inclusive, because aggregation will be done and small farmers who had been losing, I think they can be organized into groups of farmers called farmer producer organization. They can get a better deal. The last one, that is the modification of the Essential Commodities Act. The massive storage capacity that is needed in the country, because agriculture by nature, the production comes at a point of time while consumption can be throughout the year. Somebody has to store. Now, if you put storage limits at the drop of a hat, then no big players are investing in specialized storage facilities, because when the investors come, they are thinking of a 30-year long period. They have to recover the returns on their investments. So this country has been wasting in a way. There is a lot of crop loss, and there are estimates whether to 90,000 crores every year we are losing because of lack of proper storage facilities and so on and so forth. So I feel the broad direction is in all these three laws in the right direction for the benefit of the farmer, but there is always scope for improvement. And the situation at present is something very, very unfortunate.
I think the most important thing is, and I think all of us have said this, there is no one Indian farmer. For example, after the repeal of the APMC Act in Bihar in 2006, which a lot of us and many people in the news said was a very historic movement. About a few years after that, the anthropologist Jeff Witzow, who had been working for many years in Ara, spoke to farmers in that area, and they didn't even know that the APMC Act had been repealed or that the mandi had been closed formally from regulation. And the reason they didn't know is because prior to the repeal, they never went to the mandi. They, as Professor Gulati said, they actually sold in the village, and they continued to sell in the village even after the repeal of the APMC Act, right? So, a farmer in Bihar or in Odisha may not react, in a way if they have not actually had the benefit of a mandi system or even the liabilities of a mandi system, right? But they have not actually seen the system that we are proposing to reform materialize in their lives. This would be very different in a state like Madhya Pradesh or Karnataka or Maharashtra, which has a mix of both outside mandi sales as well as a strong mandi system. And it would be different again, as we are seeing in Punjab and Haryana, where the mandi is not only the site of exchange for over 90+% of farmers, but it is also the site of an assured price. In fact, historically, the regulation of agricultural markets via a regulated marketing system predates the price support system. It's a colonial system. It actually was first mentioned most formally in the 1928 Royal Commission for Agriculture, and then subsequently made its way into very important parts of policy in all our plan documents. The idea there, and I think this is important to remember, was that the structure of Indian markets is such that you have a very, very large number of small producers. And we know that today over 86% are small and marginal farmers. And you have a very large number of poor consumers, right? Even today, we know that if you're over 10,000 rupees per month income, you actually belong to the highest categories of Indians, right? In the top 10% of the Indian income distribution. So we have a structure where you have very large number of poor consumers and poor producers. And for poor producers, they are price takers in the market. So when I first started my fieldwork in Madhya Pradesh, farmers would always tell me, Kisan ek aisa utpadak hai. We are the only producers who stand in the mandi and we take price. We don't get to declare the price of the produce. They were not saying they should be able to. They are saying this is the condition of agricultural producers, that you are price receivers. So the idea was, if you're always going to have to discover the best possible price in a market, that you should give farmers the best shot at good price discovery. So you create agricultural produce markets, right, where multiple buyers can gather. And ideally, you would have an auction system. You would have standardization of weights and measures, and it would be a payment settlement mechanism, right? That you wouldn't have fly-by-night operators. The big problem that has happened, I think, in all our confusion is that this reform, I think, in trying to bypass or to get around the mandi, which there's no doubt is a complicated, politically embedded and entrenched institution, has in some ways forgotten some of the first principles of reform, which is that you want good price discovery, you want good weighment practices, and you want to have some mechanisms to ensure that farmers get good price settlement, right? And in the design of the reform, and this is where I will sort of come back and we can discuss further, I think much more could have been done and should have been done to ensure these elements. And I want to make just one final point, and there's so much to discuss, but I think it's wrong to say that this is a historic moment in the sense that this is the first time we are attempting serious agricultural market reform. I started fieldwork in Madhya Pradesh in 2008. ITC had already bought there for 4 years. Karnataka has interlinked all of its mandis through an electronic marketing system. Maharashtra has created private markets, private mandis. Quite a few of them are operating. Bihar went and did the other extreme, repealed its act. There is a lot for us to learn from the experiences of this. And I do think there is a role, an increasing role for interstate coordination. In 2013, when the recommendation came, it was for the central government to pass an interstate trading law, not a farm produce trading law. And I think Professor Gulati himself has a number of times talked about the importance of having a GST-like council, an interstate council for agricultural markets, moving us towards a more common and synchronized marketplace. Personally, I think that would have been still a better approach. I completely understand the frustrations with agricultural marketing reform. I know it's political. None of the reforms I mentioned were done without pain. There was a lot of, sort of reaction from all actors when any reform is attempted. Agricultural marketing is a political subject. However, I still feel that keeping the long distance in mind, right? And to me, this tells us something about how we think about agriculture. Today in 21st century India, we would not do financial market reforms like this. We would not think deregulating our financial markets in this manner, no licensing, no market intelligence system, no proper is good enough. We would think it's a regressive step. And why should we think like that for agriculture? So to me, forward-thinking policy would build better regulatory systems, better regulatory design, and a much more robust institutional framework. I feel this is a missed opportunity for us to have done that. And I only hope that now we can go back to the drawing board at some point once trust and other things are rebuilt to do the work that really needs to be done.
Actually, the discussions have been going on for a long time. Since 2003, almost every government has been writing to the state governments to adopt the model laws circulated by the center, the regulations circulated by the center. So yesterday, Mr. Sharad Pawar's letter to the chief ministers was in the news. So there is no doubt that the center, minister, secretary, everybody was asking the state governments to take up these reforms, and many states did. In fact, horticulture was deregulated in several states. Even in Delhi, it was deregulated. It is a different matter that hardly any trading moved out of Azadpur because the government did not provide land to a private mandi, and obviously getting so much of land in Delhi was going to be so much expensive. However, in Maharashtra, more than 50 private mandis have come up in the last few years. So it is not that these reforms were not under discussion. Two things happened the way these reforms were implemented this time. One was the impact of the pandemic. Everybody had just not even fully recovered, had just gone through this crisis of lakhs of people going back from homes, and there was trauma in the country. And in the middle of that trauma, this sudden promulgation of ordinances came, which was not noticed at that time. The seriousness was not noticed. On each of these reforms, these three ordinances, I wrote an article in the Wire on each one of them, in which I pointed out, some of the shortcomings and the promises of these. So I would say that even though the reforms have been under discussion, but I think ordinance was a little surprising. And in the early days, even Akali Dal did not gauge the correct impact of reforms. Of course, now, anybody can say anything, but at least I think they did not gauge the public mood. And when they were enacted by Parliament, of course, again in a hurry, in a great hurry in Rajya Sabha, so no discussion was allowed. And then, since then, Punjab has been agitating. The thing is that reforms in India, due to our federal polity, different states being at different levels of development. Now, Punjab is at a completely different place than Bihar or Jharkhand or West Bengal. Northeast, we hardly talk about, but obviously Northeast is a totally different place as far as agricultural marketing is concerned. So the reforms we have seen have succeeded when they have been gradual and more consultative. I'll give you one example and then shut up. Diesel reform, diesel subsidy was reformed in 2013 by a government which is, everybody calls it a lame duck government. But it was that government which decided to increase the diesel price by 50 paisa per month till the subsidy is not required. So diesel prices continue to rise 50 paisa per month. Similarly, in 2013, before the 2014 elections, again by a very lame duck government, the sugar reforms were taken up. The Ministry of Food, in which I have served for long years, it used to determine how much sugar will be sold by a sugar mill every month. Not only the quantity was decided for the country, but every month how much sugar will you sell? It was decided by the Ministry of Food. Also, there was 10% levy on sugar. But a lame duck government decided that, and the country accepted it because the Rangarajan committee had prepared the ground for that. In this case, the reforms were too far-reaching, very, very important, very desirable in many respects, but perhaps they could have come more gradually and after more consultation.
My feeling is if they repeal the laws, then I think this government will lose its credibility, and I don't think any major reforms, any field can be, undertaken after that. So short of that, there is always scope for improvement and assurance to be given. I think government is coming forward on that, but if the farmer organizations and other activists are saying no, only repeal and nothing like that, I think that will create anarchy in the system, and then government will have to manage. But reforms, as everybody knows, sometimes are not very easy. There were 2-3 things that were, in a way misconceived. One, APMC Mandi will be abolished, MSP will be abolished. Third, your land also will be taken by the Ambanis and the big corporate houses and so on and so forth. I would ask the farmers of Punjab. I think everybody is owning a tractor in Punjab, literally, right? And India is the biggest manufacturer of tractors in the world. And there are 4 players who control almost 85-90% of the market. Mahindras alone control 40% of tractor market.
They acquired Siraj tractors also.
So the question is, are they doing great service to the farming community, or are they exploiting the farming community? If you don't trust them, the big investments, it will not be the commission agents who will build the infrastructure for supply lines. It is the big players, the investors. So I think we have to have a trust.
Just to give you one very quick thing is that 22 states have allowed private sector to enter, private buyers to buy with licenses outside the mandi. 22 states. We still see very little corporate penetration, corporate private sector buying at the farm gate. And the reason for that is not because there wasn't a nationwide market, is actually most of these corporates also buy from mandis. They also buy from larger traders, and they have continued to do so because it makes good sense for them. Commercial logic. Even at its peak, ITC retained mandi licenses and it retained mandi artyas even while it bought in chopals. So I think to assume that the corporate private sector will immediately go to the farm gate and put up options simply does not, sort of link with what we've seen. And I think it also is very important that we understand our markets are overwhelmingly private, but they are full of micro, medium, and small scale agribusiness. Artyas are one thing, commission agents, but millers, processors, logistics operators, traders, wholesalers, retailers.
And there are connections.
They are connections, and they are not all middlemen and intermediaries. They are vital, also economic participants and entrepreneurs. So we can make chains more efficient. I'm not saying that we should not work on those things and big public and private investments should come, but we need to have a vision in India for a private sector that is not just the large scale corporate private sector, but involves a whole range of different sizes of actors.
We had discussions with the late, great Mr. Arun Jaitley, and he was very clear. In fact, in one of the national days of Foundation Day of NABARD, he clearly said, and I was right there, that the biggest gain now after GST would be in agriculture if we can create one national market. You know, what is the problem? One state is imposing 8.5%. Now, this is after the GST reform. Actually, it used to be 14.5%. So you are creating a major distortion at one end. There are other states which are zero. Now, how do you create balance? So we had been, when I was a part of the government, we had been recommending that you please bring all these people together and say not more than 3 or 4% should be the upper limit. And whichever states lose at this time because of the historical, Punjab would be the biggest loser. So you assure them for the next 5 years, we will compensate you the way you did it for GST. So that would have been a good process, but you need a champion in the government, something like Mr. Arun Jaitley, to persevere this course for the next 2 years, 3 years, and then come up with a common formula. At the end of the round, we want a unified agriculture market of the country. EU, 28, 29 countries are bringing together, and we are bifurcating our own by putting all sorts of different taxes and fees and mandis. So you can't create a pan-India strategy. So that would have been the most desirable process, but it would have been an investment for at least 3 years of consultations with the states. Consultations have been going on for 17 years, but in a loose manner, not a concerted manner. Punjab's main concern is they will be losing 3,500 crores. If not today, maybe after a few years when the people will start buying from outside. And that's the concession that the government has made today, that you can impose.
This is the tax and cess they collect at APMC mandis.
That's right. There is a 6%, 3% market fee and 3% cess. That together it's about 3,500 crores that they get every year. Now they are afraid that if people start buying outside, not only the commission of the RTRs goes away, but also this fee and the cess goes away. And by the way, cess is never audited by the CAG. So the earlier point that you were saying, if the CAG, Siraj Hussain was saying, if CAG says, why don't you buy from outside? So I think some compensation package for those states where the finances are concerned, because every state's finances are in a very vulnerable situation. So center can make that palatable. But it should be a uniform situation. I would still say Punjab imposes 8%, 9%, 6% taxation and another state has zero. This is a major distortion in the country. It's a better way to compensate them and create, not more than 2% all over India.
Farmers of Punjab and Haryana also know that this paddy wheat cycle cannot continue forever. What Dr. Gulati and I have been writing is that as the original Green Revolution states, who have given food security to India for 4 decades, I remember in 2006 to 8, I went there with the then Food Secretary, Mr. Nand Kumar, begging to Punjab and Haryana to give us wheat because that year the procurement was only 11 million tons. There was no way we could meet the requirement of PDS. So there is a need to compensate them to switch over. Haryana is giving 7,000 rupees per hectare. There is a need for the center to contribute to diversification.
That's 7,000 rupees per acre, not hectare.
Right, per acre, right.
So 7,000 rupees per acre if a farmer shifts from paddy to something else.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what is that something else in Haryana?
This year, most of the farmers switched over to maize, but unfortunately, what has happened is that in the last 2 years, the prices of maize have crashed. You see, Mr. Gupta, it is very interesting. Things are all linked to each other. We think that we can promote vegetarianism and it will not have an impact on anything else. Yeah. In January and February, WhatsApp was spreading fake news that COVID-19 and other diseases are caused by poultry. So the poultry prices crashed. When the poultry prices crashed, the maize prices crashed. And as a result of that, today the farmers of Punjab are saying, during this agitation, that the MSP of maize is 1850, I am realizing 1,000 rupees. Tell me what to grow.
When you say status quo ante, do you imply a rollback of reform?
You see, I would not like to use that terminology because after all, the government has to function. Punjab is a very sensitive state and all kinds of signals are going, so some agreement had to be reached. And I think the government has done a good job by acknowledging that there is a problem. And, even at the risk of a little diversion, I must say that the same level of concern did not come when women were agitating last year against the CAA. And, nobody took any, nobody bothered to talk to them. Even the Chief Minister of Delhi, did not bother to visit them even once. So I'm happy. It is a good thing, very correct strategy of the government to come out, talk to them and finally make this offer.